Here are the best games made with GDevelop in 2024. We say this every year, but again this year, a lot happened. There were a bunch of community events and game jams, and a ton of improvements made to the engine, like the tile map object that lets users quickly paint, edit, or delete portions of their game, the multiplayer lobbies that makes it unbelievably easy to connect players together in your game, the smart object visual editor, helping users easily create and share their own new objects, like this dialog box object, the new spine object that lets users easily import their spine skeletal creations into GDevelop, dozens of new extensions and behaviors like 3D raycasting, car physics, the shockwave effect, and a third-person camera, as well as a ton of improvements to existing objects and the engine itself. And there's the 3D physics integration that's currently being developed. It's using Jolt, an open source 3D physics engine that's already being used in a number of AAA games. So of course developers are making better games, but also doing more with GDevelop. Community members were busy creating things like extensions for 3D lighting, as well as tech demos with realistic rain and shadows, and even water reflections and a lens flare. YouTubers were posting videos about games they were making, or just having fun with the engine. There was a Sonic fan game made with GDevelop that led to the creation of the 360 platformer example, that then led to the creation of the Hedgehog platformer extension. And some developers created a short film using a green screen while rendering the scenes inside the engine in real time. There was a Ghostbusters light shooter game as part of the Ghostbusters Frozen Empire movie premiere, and a Brazilian game creator was even hanging out with pop stars. In order for a game to qualify for this video, it had to be in development, released, or at least updated in 2024. But now let's get started with the games that appeared at Game Expos or large events. Starting with Stranded on a Raft, which has been updated with the new easy-to-use multiplayer lobbies and has now been played over 300,000 times across the web. This game had a booth at the Philippine GameDev Expo of 2024, but the developer didn't just have one game at the expo, they actually had two. Their second game, PisoNet Simulator, was showcased right beside it, and they even gave out stickers. There's a free version of the game on GD.Games, but they're currently ramping up the game for a larger release. Then there's Katuba's Poacher, which, after getting over 500% of their funding goal last year, the game not only had a booth at Busan Indie Connect, South Korea's biggest independent game festival, there was also a Japanese version of the game released, and it was showcased at its own booth at this year's Tokyo Games Show. You can find the demo for the game on Steam. Next is The In-Between. The game and its creator were recognized by Africa Games Week, invited to give a talk at Playtopia, nominated in the Dev Gam Awards, got coverage by GameSpot, now has a dedicated page on IGN's website, and were showcased and awarded a $5,000 grant from the Game Devs of Color Expo Direct. The game is coming soon to both Steam and the Epic Game Store. Finally, there's Kuzener Master, a game that came in 5th place in a national game development competition hosted by the Department of Science and Technology between universities in the Philippines. Now let's show off some games on Steam. Bullet Bunny, a twin-stick shooter with roguelike elements that has been played over 220,000 times between the game's launch on Steam and its demo. Then there's Deck of Darkness, which is an old-school 3D dark fantasy dungeon crawler roguelike game. Hyperspace Deck Command, a sci-fi roguelike deck builder that features customizable cards and new ships to collect as you play the game. A Death in the Red Light, a 1980s noir point-and-click mystery game published on Steam by Indie.io. Roguine, which is a bullet hell roguelike game with upgrades, multiple characters, and a variety of enemies. And there's a demo available on its Steam page. Spent Shells, a high-score top-down shooter with roguelike elements. The game is still in development, but the various early builds of the game have already had over 170,000 play sessions. Undercroft Warriors, an action-packed high-score arcade twin-stick shooter with different playable characters who each have their own weapons and abilities. Soul Park, an amusement park building sandbox game with a variety of minigames and events. This game is currently in early access on Steam. Then there's Steady, 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 a charmingly cute physics puzzle game that came in first place out of the over 300 games submitted to GDevelop's 5th Big Game Jam, and is now gearing up for a full Steam release. Then finally there's Area 37, a 16-bit retro action platformer set in a post-apocalyptic world dominated by machines, and there's a demo available for the game on its Steam page. Now let's talk about some miscellaneous games, starting with Gente Shooter, which is a fast-paced bullet hell game where certain defeated enemies can drop new weapons for you to use. This game is available to play on itch.io. Then there's Five Nights at Freddy's NES, a demake of the well-known game made to look and feel like one from the NES. The game has been played over 150,000 times and is available to play on itch.io and GD.games. Next is Golf Adventures 2, a casual golf game that has over 100 levels and a variety of physics-based mechanics that has been played over 140,000 times and can be found on Crazy Games. Stanley's Rebooted, a FNAF fan game with some familiar faces as well as a new cast of characters, and some unique twists of its own. The game is available to play on GameJolt. Scallion RPG, a monster taming game that mixes hand-drawn 2D art with a blocky 3D world. It has been worked on for over a year now, and the developer is regularly sharing updates on their socials. Aqua Cop, a casual game where you evade obstacles, collect power-ups, and try not to get caught by the police, while only being able to turn by pressing the spacebar. The game is available to play on Crazy Games. Robojanitor, a polished Sokoban game that features voice acting, a star scoring system, and surprisingly difficult levels. The game is available to play on GD.games. And finally is Phase Fragments, a 3D Mega Man Battle Network style game with fast-paced combat and a card system for the different abilities that you can use. And the game is available to play on itch.io. Now let's show off some Game Jam games, starting with GMTK 2024, which had over 32,000 people join this year's jam on itch.io. First is Grimblestone, a point-and-click FMV puzzle adventure game that placed in the top 5% of the games in the jam. And this game is actually being expanded upon by its developer and will later be launched on Steam. Then there's Poorly Constructed Rough Estimations, a game where you try to build things, but with terribly vague instructions. And this game also placed in the top 5% of games in the jam. And then finally there's Gnome Bert's Snowball, which is a deceptively cute game about murdering innocent snowmen that placed in the top 8% of games in the jam. Next are some games from jams hosted by GDevelop, starting with See Through Static, which came in first place in almost every category in the Weekend Jam 3, and the only category that it didn't get first place in was Fun. Keep It Straight, which was the #1 judge's pick from our 5th Big Game Jam. The updated version of this bar brawler can now be played on Crazy Games. Then there's Powerline Guardians, a multiplayer top-down 3D shooter made for GDevelop's 6th Big Game Jam, which was the #1 judge's pick in the jam, and as a result, got featured as the big box item on the homepage of Newgrounds as part of their prize. But aside from those, there were games from other big jams that happened this year, like Among the Deep, an atmospheric underwater exploration game that came in first place for audio design out of the almost 1,500 games submitted to Ludum Dare 56.
Almost done. There, let me get out of your way.
Then there's Inflop Frog, an adorable endless arcade game that came in first place in this year's GameDev Fireside Jam. Electricity, a 3D puzzle game where you try to fix parts of the city's power grid before the sun goes down, which came in 5th place in this year's GameDev.js Jam. Then there's Grief, a tense atmospheric horror game with goofy wobbling characters. The game came in 10th in the horror category out of the 560 games from this year's Scream Jam. And finally there's Grief and Garbage, where you solve puzzles and avoid threats in order to steal some candy on Halloween. The game came in first place in the gameplay category out of the 400 games submitted to GB Jam 12, where games must follow the technical limitations of the original Game Boy. Let's finish by showcasing some mobile games that were released this year. Fish Eat, Fish Evolution, a casual mobile game with over 10,000 downloads where you eat other fish and evolve as you collect more points. And this developer made another game called Bottle Shooting Game, as well as Find and Spot the Difference. And these games are all available to play on Google Play. Then there's Ember Watchers, a charming pixel art wave defense game with multiple characters, maps, and a clean progression system. And the game is available to play on Google Play. And then lastly is Wrestling Royal Fight, a wrestling mobile game featuring multiple characters and wrestling moves that has been downloaded over 10,000 times on Google Play. And this developer also made Medieval Warriors Arena, which was also downloaded over 10,000 times. We hope you enjoyed this year's list and that it inspires you to create your own game with GDevelop. And then maybe next year, we'll be showing off something you made.